What up? I have audio on. Hello. Hello.
There we go. Forgot to take myself off mute.
Oh. Cool.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Alrighty. So I guess I'll share my screen. All right, so you can see it like full screen now.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
Full screen. Dun, dun, dun. Here's the yeah, I think
So should I start? Give it a couple minutes.
yeah, give it a couple more minutes.
Cool.
Well, we can officially start at 2:05, I guess. We'll wait till 2:05 is fine. 2
Cool.
minutes. Mm. All right, so we have at Glitch as our guest today, and he'll be going over incident response and the mindset, and we can ask him some technical questions and things about threat hunting. And that's often a side that's often overlooked. And customers, and especially during interviews, they'll ask you about other things, like they'll ask you a lot of blue questions. So you can get started.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. And this is pretty much going to be my take on incident response. So Let's see here. So first and foremost, definitely not a subject matter expert. You know, going into this role, I felt that I kind of had to prepare for it. So I did what anyone else would do, is basically try and read up as much stuff as I could about incident response until it basically, I could fit no more into my brain. So did that to prepare. InfoSec, you know, even specifically Blue Team, isn't what I always wanted to do. I actually didn't kind of find this until, you know, a few years ago when I went to, you know, school, saw a presentation on the InfoSec, you know, that was hosted by the InfoSec Club, and that kind of sparked some interest, and I basically just dove, you know, into the deep end, and, you know, has been swimming ever since. My approach when going into InfoSec was more along the lines of certs and schooling, while kind of doing, you know, my own hands-on labs, you know, on the side. Your results may vary, but this is just what my approach was when getting into it. When getting into InfoSec, you're always kind of poised with the whole red team versus blue team debate. It's going to be, you know, either red team consisting of like offensive attacks and a mindset. Basically with red team, although you're trying many different things, you only need that one exploit, or exploit that one vulnerability in order to be successful. Whereas with blue team, it's definitely a lot of defensive countermeasures and mindset. You also need to be thinking like a red team. So what areas would be, you know, easier to exploit, things like that. And you also need to cover multiple areas to avoid compromise. So as with red team, you only need that one vulnerability, you know, to get through. With blue team, you definitely need to cover a lot more ground to stay protected. With incident response, basically it's a coordinated and structured approach to incidents that follow from detection to resolution. Whenever you're looking into organizations, there is typically an incident response team that's dedicated to this particular task. Sometimes they're integrated with the SOC. It just really depends on how the organization is structured. The organization I work at, we actually have a dedicated team that handles incident response that is separate from the rest of the InfoSec team. So our primary duties is making sure that we can prepare for incidents, kind of follow that incident response process, mitigate, and then recover if necessary. Why do organizations have incident response teams? Basically, it's just to eliminate threats from an organization's computing environment while alleviating any damage that might incur from those incidents, and making sure that operations are running. You know, large organizations, you definitely don't want to disrupt the flow of operations, and a lot of you know, compromise is geared toward attacking those operations, making sure that it's going to disrupt that. So within incident response, it's making sure that, at least in my eyes, it's covering a larger scope to make sure that everything is running smoothly. This is more of just a kind of a breakdown as far as the incident response process. Again, every organization may have something different, but this is just kind of like a textbook, you know, process for incident response. So the first thing is, you know, preparation. You want to make sure you're actively, you know, conducting planning whenever you're, to make sure you're aware of your organization's assets and networks. If there's areas that you're not focusing on, you know, that's obviously going to leave that open to vulnerability. So you want to make sure that you're actively prepared for any incidents that might occur.
What's a process like you might go through when you're eradicating or eliminating a threat. So,
Uh,
but
yeah. So whenever you're, eradicating a threat, so, alert's going to come in, depending on the alert. There's definitely an investigative, process when going into that. You don't want to instantly overreact and, um, try and uh, be as reactive, to the incident. So you definitely want to kind of follow this process, that I'm going over. You want to be able to identify it, contain it, eradicate it, and then recover if necessary. So it's definitely something that might have a knee-jerk reaction, or you may be inclined as human nature to have a knee-jerk reaction whenever an alert, pops off, from your scene. But ultimately, as long as you follow this process, it's definitely geared toward more success when handling incidents in an organization. Um, I think the worst thing you can do is be reactive, or I should say emotionally reactive to, incidents that come in. Um, my shift is actually more overnight. Um, and so I'm anticipating a lot more activity just because of the hours that I'm going to be working, but it's more, I'm going to be more inclined to have that time to kind of investigate any incidents that pop off from my scene. Whenever incidents do come in, the next thing I'm going to want to do is basically identify what it is. Is it an actual threat or is it a false positive?
what does it look like to y'all? So let's say I land on a system. Like,
Mhm.
what does that look like to you? Do you just look at like the TCP dumps of my connection, or like does it aggregate it more so it like displays like I ran a PowerShell command? Like,
Yeah, so what it'll look like for me is, alerts going to come through the scene based off of, indicators of compromise. If you're, say, attached to, a foreign IP, obviously that's going to kind of throw up a red flag where I'm going to want to investigate that. If something that is coming through, such as say like, a PowerShell command, when they're typically shouldn't be. That's going to throw up a red flag. So there's definitely things that are, going to be popping off, based off of those indicators of compromise that I'm going to want to investigate. Um, you know, if it actually does turn out to be a legitimate threat, then and at that point, what I want to do is contain that threat. Um, that's either going to be used to isolate it. Um, of course, there's always going to be things in place to assist with that containment, whether it be firewalls, whether it be IPSs, things like that.
so if I like land on a system, y'all can actively just start turning on like firewalls and really like shutting me down. Uh,
Well, the good thing about those is that those are always going to be active, and that actually does help out a lot within um, any incidents that do come through. So if there's things that are going to be blacklisted, obviously that's not going to get through, but we're going to still get that alert that there was an attempt from a malicious or blacklisted IP that was trying to gain access to the network. Um, when going into an organization that already has processes in place, it's definitely a lot easier to kind of follow through with those processes as opposed to starting up a incident response team from scratch and kind of building that foundation. So there's definitely a lot of lesson learning if you're kind of in that earlier stage of an organization. But if you're already in an established organization that has certain processes and SOPs in place, those are obviously going to kind of help in being able to follow this incident response process, for any type of incidents that do come through. So say if you're able to actually get through the network, at that point, after I contain it, then, it's basically my job to eradicate it. So say if there is malware that got, somehow managed to get through all of our defenses in depth and, is now on a, an endpoint. So at that point, it would be my job to eradicate that, malware, to eliminate it or get it off of that particular endpoint, scrub it, make sure everything is good to go. And then that kind of transitions into that recovery process. So if, say, there's enough damage to, hard drive, from that malware, then obviously, we would go in and re-image it, or, practice other recovery options in order to make sure that, operations are continuing. And
it can be really tricky where the bad guys can hide malware, because they can even hide it into like Python libraries if it's a Linux system. They can embed a malicious code in any of the modules. So if you have a Python script running on the system, every time the server runs that Python module through whatever, it'll run the malware, and that's a good way to establish persistence.
Yeah, and obviously, APTs are definitely going to be one of the more challenging, malwares that come into play. So that definitely is going to take a lot more, investigation, going into it, and you really have to kind of do your due diligence when it comes to, knowing your network topology, knowing your organization's infrastructure, just to kind of make sure all bases are covered. You definitely don't want to go into a role and basically just be blind and reactive. I think that's honestly the worst possible approach, because at that point, now you're just in a reactive type of state, and without enough knowledge of your organization, it's basically going to set you up for failure, not only in your role as an incident response analyst, but also, with your organization's assets. So once we're actually able to go ahead and recover from that compromised, the compromise of that incident, now we move on to our lessons learned, and basically documenting exactly what happened, how it got, through, what we did to contain it, eradicate it, and recover. And then you're going to debrief with your team as far as what your documentation is following regarding that incident, and sharing that information, that documentation is going to be helpful, because say within a couple weeks, couple of months, a similar incident comes through. Now everyone kind of has already that knowledge shared from previous to be able to kind of apply it to the next incident. So definitely sharing knowledge is going to be, beneficial, not only to you as the incident response analyst, but also as being a part of the InfoSec team with your organization. So now I touched a bit on indicators of compromise, but wanted to kind of focus a little bit on there, just because it's going to help you as far as investigating, incidents. When you're building indicators of compromise, it's going to, basically what you're doing is finding characteristics or attributes of things that could be potential threats, or things that you want to be alerted on if those type of characteristics show within your organization. So kind of like how I mentioned with blacklisting, like IPs, if you're aware of certain IPs that are already used in malicious compromise, that's one thing you would want to indicate as far as an alert that would pop up on your SIEM. So even though you're going to be blacklisting that IP, knowing that that IP is trying to access your network kind of builds a threat profile of, I guess, different attributes that are trying to attack your organization. Obviously not planning properly is going to result in more compromise, because if you're not planning, according to like what the incident response process, goes through, obviously you're kind of leaving yourself more open to compromise. So you definitely want to plan, properly whenever you're going into this. By building that, those indicators of compromise into your SIEM, it's obviously going to be more beneficial because now you're kind of having additional help with any type of threats that are kind of coming into your network. So definitely knowing the characteristics of an incident, documenting it. So anything going forward that may be trying to compromise your organization, that's going to definitely help out with, kind of like the threat intelligence and being proactive in the future. A big thing that I like to stress on is not overreacting. And I know I touched a little bit about this, earlier, but it's definitely something I like to emphasize, just because it's quick to want to overreact whenever all of a sudden these alerts are popping off. And when you overreact, you kind of forget all those processes you had in place that are going to help in mitigating those threats. Like I said, human, nature, you're obviously going to be quick to have that knee-jerk reaction of overreacting. So I always like to emphasize that whenever you're dealing with any type of incidents that are coming through. I know that I've already been guilty of it because first couple of days being in my role as incident response analyst, I found myself overreacting for things, and I had to kind of scale it back and remember there's processes in place that are there to help me be able to address any incidents that are coming through. So, that's my next point, is relying on those processes. Knowing that you have those processes in place for a reason is what's going to help you be successful in mitigating those, threats that are coming through your organization. So definitely rely on those, because that's going to help you not only be, remaining calm during incidents, because obviously when you're, having a bunch of incidents come through, it's natural to kind of feel overwhelmed and, from there want to overreact. So relying on those processes will definitely help kind of take the pressure off. Another thing, when it comes to alerts, through your SIEMs, not everything is going to require an action. There's going to be a lot of alerts that come through that are more informational. Depending on how you have your SIEM set up, some may just be informational, some may be low level, while others may be critical. But not everything's going to require an action. Some are just there for informational purposes that you can go to back later to kind of build a threat profile, or add that to your investigative processes, for future alerts. So definitely utilize your resources when it comes to what you have in your organization and dealing with incident response. Depending on your organization, you may have different appliances in place that are going to help with giving you alerts on different incidents. There's going to be documentation that's going to be shared throughout your team, or just as far as processes go, that you want to rely on, so that way you kind of know what to go over. Some organizations have standard operating procedures that you would do whenever certain things come through. So just make sure that you utilize that documentation, because it's definitely going to help you be successful in that incident response role. And utilize your team members. Especially for me, I utilize my team members a lot just because I'm still fairly new in my role, but also too, there's a lot of tribal knowledge that may not necessarily be documented, but is just more aware, and shared throughout the team. So definitely utilize your team members, because not only will they kind of pass down that knowledge that they've learned over the years, but they are going to want you to succeed as well. That's obviously the goal of the team is to be successful in whatever your goals are. You're only as strong as your weakest link. So definitely utilize those team members, because they're going to help you be successful.
You touched on documentation, and I was curious, does your organization use like different frameworks? Like I know there's MITRE, or do you guys have like your own framework for dealing with like how to deal with incidents?
Yeah, so organizations are going to adopt different frameworks depending on what kind of fits their I want to say, I guess, industries. Obviously, if you're working in the financial industry, you're going to have a different framework compared to someone in like the manufacturing industry. So there's definitely frameworks in place to kind of help with that. At my organization, we do have our own framework in place that kind of works, but um, again, it all just depends on the organization and the industry that you're in is going to help you choose the appropriate framework that's going to give you the most success.
What do you guys look for in your organization as like a I'll let you continue, as like a
I'm
big
not.
indicator of compromise? You said like overreacting and everything, but like
Mhm.
what are some of like what's the thing you should overreact to if you see it? Like, or what would you think would be the thing to overreact to? You know?
Um, I would say probably one of the biggest things is obviously like a DDoS attack, and I hate to use the word overreact, but it's definitely, I won't say overreact, but definitely something that would want to take precedence over anything else that may be going on, um, that day. So obviously, if you're, experiencing, symptoms of like a DDoS attack, and then all of a sudden now you lose all that availability, into, different areas of your network infrastructure, obviously that's going to want to take precedence over anything else. So things like DDoS attacks, things that are going to affect operations, or access to different areas, that's obviously going to want to take precedence over something like a virus on a an endpoint. So I would definitely say DDoS would probably be the biggest one. Now going into an incident response role, these aren't, I would say, textbook qualifications. These are just things that I've kind of learned that since being in this role that has helped me kind of be successful in that role. So definitely multitasking is a must. You're obviously going to have different appliances up and different alerts that are coming through. You may be working on one incident, but then all of a sudden another incident or alerts coming through. So definitely knowing how to multitask is definitely going to be successful in this type of role, just because you are kind of being pulled in different directions whenever you're in the incident response. Analytical skills are definitely a must as well. It's, especially in InfoSec, it's easy to kind of, I shouldn't say in InfoSec, but it's easy to kind of see things on the surface. But being in InfoSec, you learn that not everything is what it seems. So having that analytical mindset is going to, help you be successful, because now you're kind of thinking beyond of what just the traditional, approach would be, when it comes to analyzing alerts or analyzing IOCs. Attention to detail is another big thing. You definitely want to be able to kind of think, see things through, look for those tiny details, because sometimes those tiny details are going to be big tails into, you know, what's involved with that particular incident. So definitely attention to details, definitely a big thing. That's going to, go a long way in this type of role. Communication is also key. If you're not communicating with team members or with other departments in your organization, obviously you're not going to get very far. You need to kind of have that communication, established, to make sure that not only are you sharing knowledge, but you're able to get information from other, team members or even other people in your organization. We had one incident where an alert came through of sensitive information that was being queried through, one of our databases, and looking through the alert, it showed that, one user was, querying this database, but as I was looking through the payload, now it showed another user, but they were, using someone else's endpoint. And if I didn't look at that payload, I would have just taken it at face value and say, oh, it was just, Joe Schmo doing, dev rule testing on, one of their databases. But by looking at that payload and noticing those little details, now all of a sudden I was able to get a bigger picture of what was going on. And that's just like an example of utilizing that attention to detail to kind of see the bigger picture and know what's going on. So definitely
Do you
attention to
guys
detail.
look mostly at like the network traffic going on, or like the logs being pulled from like the system, the host systems itself as well, being compared to the network that's running over the network?
It's a little bit of everything, to be honest. We in our organization, we have a lot of appliances in place that are going to be looking at different things. So, web application firewalls, definitely network logs, and event logs from systems. Those are all kind of being aggregated to give us more exposure into our organizational assets. So having that much information is what kind of gives us a bird's eye view of what's going on within our organization, and in my opinion is beneficial because now because we have many different departments that are utilizing different technologies, it helps us be able to address false positives and address legitimate threats. So I think that's definitely beneficial with what we have going on in our organization.
What kind of like do you spend a lot of time doing like writing alerts for it? So like you find like something on the network traffic you'd like to like document, is part of the document process and reporting process, developing writing an alert for that for
Yeah,
this.
definitely. If there's, when it comes to writing alerts, if there's certain things that we're wanting to either say, pay attention to or kind of build a threat profile, we're going to want to, write up those alerts and kind of use it in a test environment just to see if it starts to pop off and, give us the information that we're looking for. Once we're done with that test phase, then we're going to move to production and then utilize that to kind of, capture more information, about, anything that we're trying to look for, in a particular, when it comes to like particular alerts. So definitely, rule creation, fine tuning those rules, because obviously, things aren't going to go as planned when you first deploy it. There's always that learning phase, and you're wanting to make sure that you're fine tuning those rules to eliminate false positives and kind of give you accurate information when those alerts do come through.
Do you guys use a tool to write the alerts for you? So, or is it like you're manually writing the rules in a terminal?
We actually manually write the rules.
That's so cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's easier to kind of go with an out of the box rule, but when it comes to those out of the box rules for appliances, you're not going to get the information that you're really looking for, or you just may get inundated with a lot of false positives. And I think by writing your own rules is going to help you get the information you want while weeding out the things you don't want. And ultimately, at that point, you can edit those rules and just kind of make them your own. You obviously know what works for you in your organization and your department. So I think writing those rules is honestly the best approach, just because it's giving you ultimate control over what alerts are going to come through and how you're going to be able to mitigate those alerts. Which actually kind of leads me to my next point as far as just being resourceful and just kind of knowing what resources you have available to be successful, in your role. At my company, we have a lot of resources that we can utilize to be successful and, mitigating, threats. So utilize those resources. If your company is spending the money to go ahead and provide you with those resources, use them to your benefit, learn everything you can about the resources you have, so that way you can ultimately be successful in your role as an incident response analyst. And last but not least is patience, which is something I learned to practice over the years, but patience in, InfoSec goes a long way. And what I mean by that is that if I go into work and all of a sudden I have, 100 alerts, I need to have the patience to know or to go through those and apply all the other qualifications I just listed to actually seek out legitimate threats. If all these alerts are coming through and I just don't have the patience to go through those, then I may, and I may have overlooked something, or I may have, allowed something to go through that should have been denied. So patience is definitely going to go a long way, not only in this role, but in this industry as well. So definitely, if you don't have patience, you definitely want to practice that and get good at it. Another thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is imposter syndrome, which is really big in InfoSec, but I mean, I know it also applies to other industries as well, but being an InfoSec, imposter syndrome is huge. I've suffered from it, and I don't know if you suffered from it, but I'm sure it's definitely something that is present in this industry. It's easy to fall for it, and there's going to be a lot of self-doubt. When I first started in this role, I was super excited. One being at my first InfoSec role, but two, I'm feel like I'm actually projecting into my career and what I've been going to school for, what I've been studying for, all the things that I've been doing prior to accepting this role. It's kind of like gotten me here. So there's going to be a lot of self-doubt, especially being new. You're going to think that you're not cut out for it. You're going to think that maybe you're not as ready as you thought you were, but that's just all goes into imposter syndrome. The first day I was excited and just ready to kind of hit the ground running, and after a couple days that imposter syndrome kind of started to set in, and I had to kind of check myself and realize you're new, but you didn't go through studying for certs or going to school for this or staying up late to read and brush up on knowledge or do virtual labs. You're not doing that for nothing. So anytime that there's that self-doubt, just remind yourself that you're here for a reason. You belong in this industry. Also learn to accept that you're going to fail. I mean, it's not everything's going to be a success, and this was a hard pill for me to swallow just because no one likes to fail. And I always feel that when I fail, it's it takes a while for me to kind of recover from that. But going into accepting that you're going to fail is going to be a lot easier in dealing with imposter syndrome, because you're going to be able to kind of recover from it faster. And last but not least, I mean, like I already touched on it, but just remember that you're working toward a career in InfoSec or into incident response. Just remember that you belong here. You're not doing all this work for nothing. You obviously are doing this work to improve yourself and be a contributable member in InfoSec community. So just remember that you do belong here for that.
Do you find, so like, let's say you have a day and you look through like a bunch of logs, like 100 logs or 100 reports, you didn't find anything. Is that a part of the imposter syndrome? Like, do you feel like you wasted the company's time and money if you don't like provide value?
I wouldn't say that you're not providing value, but the best approach that I could say with that is that if you're turning up no results with anything, I think that there needs to be either some fine tuning with your approach or with the processes you have in place. So I think that would kind of fall on you to know that being an InfoSec, bad guys don't take days off. There's always going to be threats. So if you're doing, things where you're not getting alerts or you're not getting, your things aren't in place or things aren't popping off, from your seams, then that's when I would recognize that I need to change something, whether it be, the rule tuning or change the, uh, either whitelisting or blacklisting or change, something in place to get those threats to actually come in. 'Cause like I said, bad guys don't take days off. If they did, we wouldn't, have jobs to go to every day. So I wouldn't say that that would translate to the imposter syndrome, but it's something that you would need to recognize as part of the job that, as long as you have a job, then there's going to be, bad guys that are still doing work and everything. And now I guess I'll just open up to any questions that anyone's joined that, has, or if you have additional questions, feel free to go ahead and.
Do you feel like your job's more like Indiana Jones, or do you feel like a Boba Fett when you're going around looking for bad?
I would definitely say Indiana Jones. And I think that's just because I'm still in that, learning phase of the role. So I'm definitely going and, seeking out, you know, information, seeking out, trends, characteristics, and attributes. So I'm still in that kind of discovery phase where I'm wanting to learn, a lot more and kind of build that profile before I get to that Boba Fett stage. But, that kind of goes in line with your kind of reactive and proactive approach when it comes to incident response, which I didn't include, but I'll go ahead and, kind of address that in the questions that when it comes to incident response, it's more of a reactive role. Alerts come in through the SIEM, and you're basically addressing those alerts that are coming through. So it's definitely a reactive, process. Once I'm sure, I'll get to that point, but once I'm more established in the role, and then I think that I would be able to transition into that proactive approach or that Boba Fett, type of role where now I'm not just being reactive, but now I'm actually seeking out, vulnerabilities, or I'm seeking out different, things that I can kind of stop before they start.
In your organization, do they use you both as an active, like you're actively looking for it, like the Boba Fett, and as the Indiana Jones? Do they kind of expect that, like you're both sides of it from the organization, but they're
Right now, no, but there is definitely that expectation, and I actually, I welcome that, expectation. It's you could only, prepare, so much when it comes to, incident response, where you get to a point that now you want to seek out, those vulnerabilities. You want to be able to seek out ways that, bad guys might be able to, get into your organization. So I definitely welcome that, but I think at this, stage, they're keeping me in that Indiana Jones role where I'm, investigating, building, those indicators of compromise, so that way it could prepare me for a successful transition into that proactive role.
Does anybody else have any questions? What material could you provide any materials, or what would you recommend for people who are like, you initially were really interested in the red team, but the market's really big for blue team. So I can see why you transitioned. But do you have any like materials that you could recommend for like writing alerts and maybe doing your own stuff at home?
Being at home, it's a little bit hard just because you don't have the budget that an organization does. The best thing that I can recommend is to just kind of brush up on knowledge first, and then apply that knowledge to, more of a hands-on type of experience. I would say just build up virtual machines and kind of build your own virtual lab to kind of practice in. Definitely picking up a few books to kind of build that knowledge base is going to help you kind of prepare for that hands-on. And if you want to also do more out of the box things, I mean, I know OpenSock definitely is a good company. We actually had them host our Capture the Flag at the Blue Team Village at DEF CON. And it was a great Capture the Flag. Because I was volunteering, I didn't get to actually participate in it, but from what I saw and the reaction from everyone that did, it was really good. So there's definitely resources out there that you can take advantage of to kind of prepare you for that role. But you can utilize things just like seams, and just kind of put a seam on your on a virtual machine, just kind of capture traffic, throw up Wireshark and just kind of look into network packets and just kind of get familiar with like the guts of traffic itself, the guts of the seam, and just kind of utilize that to kind of prepare yourself.
Have you ever had to involve law enforcement in your role? Like, if you found somebody, and have you on the same level as the law enforcement, do you stay in contact with your ISP in for helping blocking like DOS or malicious actors?
As far as law enforcement, we actually do have ex-law enforcement at our organization that's really helpful with kind of like the law enforcement side of things. As far as kind of getting things set up for like takedowns for like fake social media sites, or things like that. As far as with our ISP, that I'm not too familiar with. I think just because I'm still kind of green in the role, where I don't know the ISP involvement. But that's definitely probably something I will ask them when I go into work next week. Any other questions?
I do have one question. So, like, what's one thing you look for? Is it the network traffic, or is it like the host-based commands being run? Because I've often heard that like they'll like you can sit on the system for a while and they won't notice you until you start scanning, and I enter the recon phase, and I've moved out of the privilege escalation phase. Um, do you have a lot of alerts on system processes running?
Yeah, we do. So there's definitely a lot that comes from network traffic, but also a lot from processes as well, our internal processes. So say if like for example, just the other day we had alerts come through of different like Active Directory alerts that were coming through, where people that were not in an admin role were making changes to Active Directory organizational units. So there's definitely things in place that also capture inline traffic that we have. It actually turned out to be a false positive after investigating it, but yeah, we do practice both. So there's definitely the network side, but there's also the inline side as well that we're having to juggle. So right now the team is kind of split where we're doing both. So it's definitely more beneficial as far as being new in that role, because now I'm kind of getting information from both sides, and I think that's going to help me be successful down the road.
Well, it was great having you, Glitch, and we'll had an amazing time listening to you. And thank you for being here. And this will be the end. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.